We have a loaded show here on a Thursday, Locked On Lions.
You are Locked On Lions, your daily Detroit Lions podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, here we go, everybody. We are precisely 2 weeks out until the NFL draft. Matt Derry with you. It's Locked On Lions on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today is Thursday, April 10th into Friday, April 11th. Our very good friend from theathletic.com and the Welcome to Detroit podcast with Colton Pouncey, Nick Baumgardner, going to join us coming up momentarily. Writes for The Athletic, covers the draft. We're going to talk to Nick all about free agency, the draft, prospects, chatter, and more here on this Thursday edition of Locked On Lions. Thanks for making us your first listen and checking us out wherever you get your podcasts. Shout out to our everydayers who are out there that watch and listen to the podcast daily. That includes two of my favorite guys from Baker Tilly, the great Kurt Siebenoller, and yes, Thomas Craig. Come on, Craig. Love having those guys as listeners and big Lions fans. We appreciate you guys immensely. Locked On Lions today brought to you by the Gametime app. Download Gametime, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Want to go see the Pistons and Knicks tonight? Get the tickets on Gametime and head right down there and do that. If you want to be a call of the day, which we will play a call of the day tomorrow, go to speakpipe.com/Derry podcast page. Leave a little voicemail there, and we might select you as our call of the day. Got some submissions that came in today. Nick Baumgardner going to join us, like I said, momentarily, talk some draft with Nick. Does a great job for The Athletic. First and foremost, a couple of things. Number one, there's a report out there, and I saw this. John Macaroon posted it on the Lions on SI website. But Mike North, who's in charge of the NFL schedule, was on a podcast in Buffalo today and said there's a chance that they are looking at the schedule release for 2025 to be likely either May 13th, 14th, or 15th. So mark your calendar for May 13th, 14th, and 15th that night. That would be when the Lions schedule and the entire NFL schedule would come out. I'm still not ruling out the Lions play the Eagles in week 1 on Thursday Night Football to start the season. We'll have to wait and see on that. Also, very quickly, Georgia big tackle Dylan Fairchild was in town in Allen Park today having a reported visit with the Lions. Fairchild is kind of considered the third best guard in this guard class for the draft. 6'5", 318, coming out after his junior season from Georgia. He only allowed one sack, just one sack, his entire career. Now, there's two elite guards that are head and shoulders above everybody. Number one is Tyler Booker from Alabama, who's just awesome. And I'm going to talk about the Lions trading up in a second as a possibility. But Tyler Booker is a guy that, man, would be amazing in Honolulu blue and silver, but I don't think he's going to last until 28. That would have to be a Brad Holmes move up to get him. And then Tate Ratledge, who's Fairchild's teammate at Georgia, is also an elite interior offensive lineman. So the Lions are thinking about at number 28 or late in the first round, if they need to make a trade up, to bring in some competition for Graham Glasgow and for Christian Mahogany. Ratledge fits the bill. He's got the mullet and everything. But Dylan Fairchild, his teammate at Georgia, was in town today and is likely projected to be a third or fourth round pick. But again, he's a good football player, and Fairchild is a guy that is great pass blocker, but is more of a guard despite his size at 6'5", 318. Speaking of trade-ups, I read a very good piece today at thelionswire.com. This was not written by our friend Jeff Risdon, but rather by Russell Brown of Lions Wire about how Brad Holmes likes to trade up. Traded up to get Brian Branch. Trade up to get Terrion Arnold. Trade up to get Jamison Williams. Moved back, actually, to get Jahmyr Gibbs, but you know he likes to be active in the first round. The Lions sit at number 28. And Russell brought up one trade that I think could happen if the Lions decided to move up to get a player. And that would be if the Lions called up the Atlanta Falcons and said, we want to trade and get the number 15 pick in the first round. Now, guys at 15 include Jihad Campbell and maybe Ratledge and maybe Booker or somebody like that. Actually, Ratledge won't be at 15, but maybe Tyler Booker would be. So what if the Lions wanted to move up to 15 to get the guy they really want? And this is pointed out by Russell Brown at lionswire.com. The Lions would have to trade, of course, their first round pick and swap the picks. So they would trade number 28 to move up 13 spots. They would also have to trade their fourth round pick, number 102 overall, and likely a second round pick next year. All of that to move up to get to number 15. Would that be something that you would do if you are the Lions? That's a pretty big haul. You're trading your first rounder, you're swapping that out, which is obvious. But then you're also giving up a second rounder next year, and you're giving up your fourth rounder, number 102 overall, just to move up 13 spots. But again, Brad Holmes is very calculated. Brad Holmes moved up last year to get Giovanni Manu and Sione Vaki. Those were bit players, really, last year. Manu didn't play, but Vaki did. But if Brad figures, I got to go up and get Booker, I got to go up and get somebody like that of that ilk. What if a Will Johnson slips down and maybe the Lions love him? There's a lot of options. What if the Lions are hearing that Shamar Stewart is going to go 17 or 18, or Campbell is going to go 17 to the Bucs, whatever it is. If they want to move up, which Holmes has been aggressive in doing, the trade with Atlanta would be interesting, and pointed out at lionswire.com by Russell Brown, which is a very good piece. Go check that out. All right, Nick Baumgardner, athletic.com, theathletic.com, is going to join us coming up momentarily right here on Locked On Lions, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network on a Thursday edition. And the pod today brought to you by FanDuel. NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. All right, Pistons, they're in the playoffs, baby. Pistons could be playing the Knicks. It could be playing the Pacers. Who knows? But regardless, next week when they're in the playoffs, next weekend, you want to get in on the action with FanDuel, you can. 3-pointers, to steals, to assists. FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to claim your $250 in bonus bets. Do it today. Always love catching up with this guy, Nick Baumgardner, theathletic.com, the Welcome to Detroit podcast, as well as he talks Lions football with us here on a Thursday, Locked On Lions. Nick, great to see you.
Good to be here, Matt. How are you?
Good, buddy. This is your favorite time of year. I know we were talking off air about Dane Brugler's The Beast at theathletic.com, where, I mean, that thing is enormous and you're scrolling for days looking at players. But what sense and feel do you get about the draft with 2 weeks away?
Yeah, it's been a weird one. I think that's been the best way to describe it all year that we've been doing, prep for this is like I've been saying, somebody told me in like October, November that this was going to be an annoying class because, there's not a lot of, it's not a bad class. I think that's the best way to preface this. There's not a lot of no doubt, like blue chip talent at the top of the draft, but there is a lot of ability in this draft. It's just like there's a lot of guys that need work. There's a lot of guys that, we maybe haven't seen everything yet from them. So it's one of those things where it's also going to be, kind of in the eye of the beholder. We don't know how it's all going to fall off the stack like it did last year. It was pretty easy to predict sort of how that was going to go. This year has been not just because of the quarterbacks. It's been much more difficult, across the board. So weird year, but still some good players in here for sure.
Anything stand out to you? I want to get to free agency, but I know we talked a little bit when you were at the combine, but anything that stood out to you about some of the names coming in? It seems like the Lions, last year they brought in so many corners. Yeah. Safety seems to be interesting. They've got some visits with safeties. What does all that mean to you, or does it mean nothing?
Yeah, so I've wondered about that for two reasons. One, obviously they just lost, Iffy in free agency, who is technically, when he was healthy anyway, was supposed to be part of the defensive backfield there in at least a rotational role. But also, like down the road, I feel like they have a decision to make with Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch. I just don't know if you're going to be able to afford both of those guys. Like we did at the Athletic, a 2026 free agency projection, and Kirby's like number 5 or 6 on there. for potential free agents for next year. I got to think somebody might pay him a ton, and it becomes a question of, are you interested in him more or Brian Branch more? I have to think it's Branch. And, I have to think that when it's time to pay him, you'd want to be able to do that based on, you also got to pay Aiden, maybe Gibbs and Laporta, all these other guys that need deals, not even to mention Jameson, off the top at that point. So I'm curious about that. I saw the same kind of thing. And the other thing would be, too, I think that receiver, we just had Jameson, same kind of thing. We don't know what the deal is going to be with him long term. I think safety and receiver might be something that might be creeping up in terms of interest there, because there are some good ones in this class, and if some guys fall, maybe they could attack that.
I want to piggyback off of what you just said. Let's say there's a scenario where the Lions go, look, we've got to keep Kirby Joseph. And of course, Aiden Hutchinson, there was a list we went over the other day. I think it was on SI. They didn't even include Aiden Hutchinson or Kyle Hamilton because they assumed the Ravens and Lions were never, ever going to let them walk.
Right.
But like in the Kirby sense, let's say Brad Holmes goes, I got to have him. And we got to keep him. That probably means J-Mo's gone. I mean, right? Don't you kind of view it that way?
I think that almost has to be for sure then at that point. Like, I kind of feel like we did a thing a couple of weeks ago, Colton and I did, where we sort of like went through like the 6 or 7 guys that, could be up for an extension. And Jameson was last on that list for both of us for sure, because it was just like Kirby was harder to slot in there, based on like kind of what you said. If Holmes has a preference there and really loves him, maybe that's a different conversation. But Jameson is going to be really tough. I just, not to mention the, everything he's gone through so far. It's only really been 1 year where he's been sort of productive. He would need to have another really huge year, this year, if you're even going to consider it. And on top of that, he plays at a position that, while this class receiver wise isn't awesome, the next couple are going to be very good. There's been, some of the best receivers in college football right now are freshmen, or sophomores. So there's going to be guys coming out again, and you can get young at that position again. And I kind of wonder if that might be the smartest move, based on the fact that just about every other guy they've drafted darn near needs a deal. So, he might be towards the bottom of that list. And yes, if they decide to go with Kirby, I got to think that might not even work at all with Jameson.
All right, let's put it down right now. Nick Baumgardner saying Jeremiah Smith and Amon-Ra on the same team. That's,
there you go. Perfect. Love it.
That's the way to do it. It's pretty
crazy. Stay young there. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be good. There's going to be some guys out, but you can also get young at that position, right? Like, that's an easy one to keep getting talent in here at.
Well, yeah. And Dan Campbell said that the other day, or maybe it was Brad Holmes, like, hey, at the owners' meetings, that we're going to look for a young receiver. And I was thinking, is there a way that, let's say at 28, Brad can't move up? Maybe there's an edge on day 2 that they like. Maybe there's no lineman. That, what if Egbuka was sitting at 28? Would the Lions actually do that? The fans would not believe that.
Yeah, they would have a hard time wrapping their mind around it, like, what's going on here, and it would immediately go to, well, that means Jameson's gone, right? So that would be some interesting conversations there. But at the same time, like, that's not a position of depth for them right now, even as is. Like, you've got your top 3 there with Amon-Ra, Patrick, and Jameson. And I suppose, Raymond is a nice piece somewhere in there now and again. But, like, one of those big guys gets hurt, in the top 3, and you're in trouble. So I've thought about that a couple times now. Like, if Egbuka starts falling and he's there, or heaven forbid, he slips into the second round or something, for that. I mean, that guy to me is Emeka Egbuka is this year's version, I feel like, although he's not as high end, this year's version of Amon-Ra. Like, he is gets open all the time. You can trust him with his routes, likes to block, is just a really tough kid who's, competed at a high level for a really long time, and nothing's ever been too big for him. He gives me St. Brown vibes all over the place. And what's better than one St. Brown would be 2, right? I think in some ways, right?
It is interesting if you read the tea leaves from the owners' meetings, the way they were talking about Glasgow and still having confidence in him despite the rough year, and they like Mahogany. But yet, you're right. They both come out, the GM and coach, and go, hey, we need to get younger receiver. And I remember the reaction, including myself, right here on this network, going, what are they doing taking a running back at 12? This is the dumbest thing ever.
Yeah.
And the guy's a home run hitter. So if they take a receiver at 28, maybe we need to tell both the Welcome to Detroit podcast listeners and us here, like, don't be too surprised, right?
Yeah, don't be shocked. And they brought it up a couple times now, unprompted, I think. And I just, like, those guys do not know how to lie. I think that's the thing with Campbell and Holmes, especially. I told Colton that yesterday. I think they're going to, Holmes is going to talk like either next week or something like that before the draft. I'm like, he'll give you guys, he'll tell you kind of what he's going to do. Like, he can't help himself with some of that stuff. Like, feels like he talks himself into it sometimes with the media, but for them to bring that up, and then when you really start to think about it, it's like, yeah, it wouldn't be shocking at all. Wouldn't be shocking. Maybe it'd be surprising there early, because I think you could still wait, and get some talent in there. But I definitely kind of feel like that's going to be a spot where they address this year for sure, somewhere.
Yeah, no question about it. Nick Baumgardner with us from theathletic.com. Read his stuff, subscribe. I do. I want to get back to the draft in a second, but any thoughts on free agency? Obviously, the Lions have never been a home run hitting team when it comes to free agency. Holmes does his best eating at the draft, but what'd you think of DJ Reed and everything else they did?
Yeah, I really like the Reed edition, because I feel like that was the one area where, you kind of needed to do something, obviously they weren't going to pay Carlton what he wanted. And then they immediately pivoted and got a guy who I think is maybe better and maybe is going to be better down the road. Like, he was very good in New York, if you go back and watch the tape on that. And also, like, the attitude and the fit and everything else is perfect for what they were doing. Not that Carlton wasn't, but I think it's also important to have a guy who's going to be here now for a bit to work with Terrion, because I think the things that, people could get frustrated, and rightly so, last year at some of the stuff that, he was getting dinged for and called on. But I do think he got better as the year went on. And it's important to remember Terrion was one of the youngest players in last year's draft. So I felt like that was a really good signing to get Reed in here. I liked Lopez as well. I liked that addition. I thought that was a good one. And then in general, I again liked the idea that they just didn't do anything crazy other than, probably spending a lot on a corner. But other than that, it's, they have guys that they need to pay. We just talked about a couple, down the road, and you cannot get careless with this stuff and start reaching and taking chances on guys. Like, you don't want to have all that cap space. You want to have it, on your roster, on the guys that you draft. And I think that they have really showed good restraint over the last few years with that. I feel like they've flirted with the idea a few times, of spending big, but it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless you can get a really good deal. And even with Zadarius Smith, who I thought would have come back, but he wanted more, and they held their guns and said no. And, that's another example right there. I always go back to Jamal Williams when they let him go, and it surprised a lot of people, but it was the right move, when they pivoted to Montgomery, and, they have kind of proven that they're not going to do anything rash there. And I think that's a good thing.
Where are you on Marcus Davenport? Because obviously that's a 1-year deal again. And again, they've said, if he's healthy, we love him. And that's the guy. If he's healthy, he gets another kind of reprieve here. So does Levi to an extent. But are you surprised they're, number one, they have that much faith in him, and number two, they haven't added another edge yet, which they could in a couple weeks? Yeah,
I'm kind of wondering if that might be yes. If they don't really attack the edge spot, and I'm almost wondering if you take 2 here in the draft, to be quite honest, then I'm not so sure, because then that might be a little bit too much faith in a guy that just can't stay healthy in Davenport. I mean, if, like you said, if he is healthy, then you like everything he can do. But that was sort of the question when they got him too, like, can he be healthy for any long stretch of time? I love the fact that they got Levi back. I think that's a really good addition at the price that they got him for, albeit, I think if all things go well for Levi, he'll be out of here paid somewhere else next year at the price that he wants. But Davenport's a tricky one. It reminds me a little bit of that Charles Harris deal where Holmes really liked him a lot. He, did well for them the 1 year, then they brought him back, and it was kind of, and I think sometimes, their affinity for a guy and who the player is can sometimes outweigh what's going on in reality with, the health and everything else. But, they've also taken chances on guys that have been hurt, and it's worked out. Levi's a great example. They didn't let go on him, and he helped them out a lot last year. So we'll see. But I do like the idea also of maybe double dipping at edge this year in the class and saying, whatever it is we pay Aiden is what we pay him. He's going to be one of the highest paid guys at that position. And then opposite him, we're just going to get cheap and young and just get young guys in here, over and over again. And I think that might be the move.
Rookie deals are the way to go. It's worked out for the Lions. Nick Baumgardner with us. Welcome to Detroit Podcast, of course, with this cohort from the Athletic, Colton Pouncey. More with Nick after this. Always love visiting with Nick Baumgardner from theathletic.com. Nick, you covered Michigan many, many moons ago. The best, I thought, the best beat writer that the Wolverines, covering the Wolverines many years ago, and you obviously ruffled some feathers down there.
One or two.
Didn't want you there anymore. But no, let's be honest. Josiah Stewart, it's interesting. Your take on him, because the Lions, first of all, he's not going to go 28, but the Lions have interviewed him at the Combine. They interviewed him
Yeah.
at the Senior Bowl. They interviewed him again here. He came to the local pro day. It seems like they like him. I don't know if that's a smokescreen that they talked to him so much, but is that a guy in the second? You mentioned two edges. Could they go back to back like they did last year with corners, and could he be one of those guys?
Absolutely. I think in my last mock that I did recently, I did a 3-round mock on the Athletic, and I think I had JT Tuimoloau from Ohio State in the second round going to the Lions, and then Josiah Stewart in the third going to the Lions. And to me, that's exactly like what they did last year with that corner position where, guys are falling. They like these guys a lot. It's still an area of need. Let's just go take care of it right now. And, I really like the idea of getting two young guys, who aren't the same player. JT would be kind of your edge setter who, plays maybe on first and second down, cleans up against the run, and works to get Aiden in favorable matchups, opposite him. And then Stewart would be able to come in and just be a designated pass rusher, which I feel like is going to be his, he's small, and that's going to be the thing for a lot of teams that, might not be able to take him, because as much as he can give you on third down, can he give you anything on first or second down in the NFL? I'm not sure. But if you can give me another guy in there to rotate with him, I really like that. And I like the idea, too, of double dipping at the spot like that, because, we saw this last year with Terrion and Rakestraw. Those guys came in and were close, and, they developed a bond there. They push each other. I think they're going to grow together. And I like that idea of fostering sort of someone that a young guy can lean on a little bit on a roster right now that's going to be really hard to come in and immediately make a huge splash. So I don't hate that idea at all. I think that Stewart would be a really good fit here, but like I almost feel like in addition to another guy, I don't know if he's enough on his own. You know what I mean? Like I would worry that it would be too much more like a James Houston, where you're not wondering if you're getting enough out of him just because he is small, but very good athlete for sure.
I knew that name was coming.
Yeah.
Anytime I see an undersized edge rusher that isn't the big body that Brad Holmes likes, I think of James Houston. It worked out at the beginning, and then
it did, and then it fizzled. Right, that's what you worry about, right?
At the end, no question. I before you came on, I was talking at the open of the show. Lions Wire had a really good piece about moving up and maybe trading up with Atlanta, let's say at 15, or some opportunities for Brad Holmes, which he's done in the past. It seems like he always moves up for Alabama guys. Maybe it's this time for Jihad Campbell, but do you see a scenario where if a Shamar Stewart is sitting there, or a Campbell or somebody like that Brad does that again?
I'm not sure. I think that I've wondered about that a few different times at a few different spots. Like, I don't think that Will Johnson is going to fall far enough for them to maybe, make a play on, but he's a guy that I've thought about that too, because he didn't play last year at all. He hasn't tested. Teams are worried about whether or not he can run all this. But I mean, if you were here 2 years ago and you watched him play, he's a top 10 player in this class, easy. So if he falls, I know they just spent money, but like that would be one. And you mentioned those, Jihad Campbell, it's hard to peg where he's going to go. He could be a guy that's a top 12 player, or he could slide all the way down there into the 20s, and he would be a terrific fit here. To Jalen Walker, the other kid, kind of like Jihad from Georgia, is a similar, situation there too. So I do think that I've said this the whole time. I feel like they're either going to trade down or up. Like, I think that's because if a guy starts falling that Holmes really likes, as we've seen in the past, like he can't sit still. He has to go get him. He won't let it go, past a certain number. So that wouldn't surprise me at all if they say, hey, look, we don't have that many spots that, we could get a rookie in here on anyway. So let's just try to max out what we have this year and address some needs. And if one of those edges, like if Stewart, like you said, if he starts falling, oh my goodness, like if he's at 15, all the talent that he has, plus you're not bringing him in and asking him to be like a superstar. You're asking him to be the guy opposite a superstar. That to me is kind of how the Eagles are the Eagles, right? That's what they do all the time. And so I think the Lions are in position now finally to be able to do some of that if there's some guys that they like that start sliding.
You just mentioned Shamar Stewart. I've seen some mocks where he's sitting there at 28, and I've seen others where he's gone in the teens. What's your read on him? Yeah,
he's a tough one because athletically, he's outstanding. I don't think there's anybody beyond Abdul Carter that would be a better full package athlete than him. And he's even longer and bigger. I mean, he's got terrific length. He's 270 pounds, had the terrific 40 and jump numbers at the combine. The one problem with him is we've never seen any consistent production out of him in college. Yeah. And, he did play in a pretty heavy rotation there at A&M. So I do wonder about that, if that's something that they take into consideration. But I think that's factoring into the wide ranges you see on him. And I think that's real. I think that's how teams, I think, are probably all over the place on him, also based on their own needs. Like if you need a number one edge to come in and just be a guy right now, I don't know if he's that guy. Like I think he would be maybe a guy that needs a little time. And, if you're a team like Detroit, you could probably give him a little bit of time, or a little bit of a buffer anyway, before you're really starting to hammer on him for production. So he's one of the top ones that have just like a really wide range on, we don't know where he's going to land. And it was kind of like Terrion last year, honestly. He was in that same boat. So if something like that happens again, I could definitely see something, maybe Lions making a move there.
What about Ezraku? I
really
watched
like him.
the interviews with this kid, and he's like, oh my gosh, Lion, just
football
players. It would be awesome in the locker room. If Stewart's gone, is that a fit, you think, at 28, or is he too undersized for Brad's liking?
I think he'd be absolutely a fit. Yeah, I think he would be great. I think he would be, and I think they would be fortunate again to get him down there at 28. I'm not sure if he'd be there. There's quite a bit of teams in front of them that could use an edge, and he really, really did a great job with the combine. Not just with the interviews, he had one of the best 3-cone times of any edge out there, which I think he was right up there with Aiden's time, which was awesome back when he had it. So, this is a guy with a deep bag of moves. Like he's an older player that's watched a lot of tape, studies the game, loves football. Like you said, at the combine, I mean, he just sounded like a lot. He was one of those guys, him and like Jade Barron and a couple others. You get done talking to him and you're like, oh my goodness, this guy would fit in immediately. The problem there is I think a lot of teams said the same thing to themselves, like with him. So I think he might end up going a little higher than the size and everything would indicate, just because in a class like this, he seems like a really high floor guy, and there's not a lot of those right now. So I'm curious to see where he falls too.
My final thing, we might be maybe buttering the toast before we're putting it in the oven. Is it just, why are we not saying right off the bat, all right, Zeitler's gone, we know Brad likes O linemen.
Yeah.
Is their next right guard or left guard at 28?
Yeah, that's the one I keep wondering about the most. Be it Tyler Booker, the kid from Alabama, who is just a beast. I feel like if you put him next to Sewell, it would be almost unfair. Ragnow, Booker, and Sewell would be easily the best, one side of an offensive line in terms of run blocking. You've also got Gray Zabel from North Dakota State, who I really, really like a lot, who I think can play guard until he's ready to play center. And I love the idea of getting Frank Ragnow's future replacement on the roster before he's done. Maybe this is too early because he might have a lot more time left. But I love what the Eagles did with Cam Jurgens, getting him in there. He learned from Kelsey for a couple of years, and now he's a star there at center. So Zabel could be a guy. And even Kelvin Banks, the kid from Texas, who I think could move inside and play guard, and he could possibly be the answer for you whenever Decker says, he's done. Move outside and play tackle. So I think there's like 3 or 4 options. Donovan Jackson, the Ohio State kid, they could like him too. Same kind of thing. Could be a guard or tackle. I think there's like 3 or 4 options right there this year at guard that would not only fill an immediate need, but would also give them flexibility down the road, which we all know that they love to have that because guys get hurt constantly up there as much as they run the ball. Depth is a concern, and they still love what Graham can give them, although I don't know if they're convinced that it's going to be as a full-time starter this year. So we'll see, how all that goes. I'm sure they'll have to compete for it, but I feel like they're going to address guard one way or the other in the draft. I do think high, though, would be it'd be worth it if you do it.
I like you mentioned Zabel. I got a text from somebody you and I both know who said, you're not talking enough on your show about
Zabel.
Zabel played with at North Dakota State, which would be Hank Fraley's son.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that. I did not know that. Oh,
I'm
my
like,
goodness.
All right, it's fine. We're putting out there today that there is that angle.
Wow. That's even a better fit then. That kid Zabel's one of the smartest kids offensive line-wise in the class. Like he played everything, center, guard, tackle. Did that in high school, did that in college. Nothing was ever too big for him. I think they would love him.
Yeah, we might know now who Hank wants. But,
there you go. Yeah, for sure.
Neither here nor there. Nick, keep up the great work at The Athletic. Love you and Colton together. Great combo there and on the pod, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Yes, sir, Matt. Thank you.
Nick Baumgardner with us from The Athletic and the Welcome to Detroit podcast with Colton Pouncey on a Thursday. Locked On Lions.